Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Eau Claire. I'm Rob Kuchta.
And I'm Greggmoorian.
We hope you are eagerly anticipating the annual harvest auction this coming Saturday, and to tell you about it, we are the
Greggmoorian chanters.
First we set the stage for the upcoming auction. The online silent auction begins later today at 1 o'clock p.m. and comes to a close on November 13th at that same time. So those of you sneaking peeks at your smartphones, a reminder, the silent auction begins in about 3 hours, so put the phones away for now. Some of you paying attention to dates may be asking, isn't the 13th the day following the day of the live auction, which is on the 12th? You are so correct. 10 points to huff and puff. If you miss out on the live auction item on the 12th, don't just huff and puff in indignation. You can do retail therapy until 1 o'clock on the following day. Nothing beats the pain of missing out on spending money, as does spending even more money on the silent auction. At noon on November 12th, the online sign-up for the auction events opens. When the slots for the events are filled with non-robotic entities, click on all the pictures of tan objects with dark brown spots that also include raisin oatmeal cookies. The event will be closed. The Greggmoorian chanters were initially going to make a snarky comment about the event offerings, not actually including any rings. Lo and behold, to our chagrin, there are 2 sessions off-earring construction. Just an FYI, what is the one metal that is best and worst for making earrings? Tinnitus. And then comes the UUCEC social event of the year, the non-online live auction taking place within this very room. Doors open at 6 p.m. and with your previously purchased live auction ticket, you can bypass those delayed at the so you didn't get your tickets earlier line. The auction begins at 6:30. There are 7 live auction adventures awaiting in close proximity to water. A February outing on Middle Mackenzie Lake near Spooner, Wisconsin requires an appreciation for the second most dense form of water. One salty water experience has you flying over half the Pacific to the Hawaiian island Kauai. And for the other, prepare for pasta heaven, sights of the Adriatic, and you'd better get that U.S. passport updated because you are going to Italy. All this awaits you and yours at this year's harvest auction. Silent auction bidding begins at 1 today and ends in 1 week on November 13th at 1 o'clock p.m. Event sign-ups begin online at noon on November 12th and remain open till filled. Then they close. The live auction begins Saturday, November 12th at 6:30 here in the sanctuary. Good day, good luck, and good bidding.
Good morning. So this is my This I Believe thing, and I'm going to admit that my spirituality has been kind of stagnant as of late, but that's not a bad thing. I've been going to CBTC and working alongside that, and that has not been a great balance, but that's just my own time management reflecting back on me. But I recently took a trip to New York City. That was really fun. And I went with a friend. And one thing we noticed is that there was kind of a weird overarching theme of death throughout the whole thing. It was not intended at all, but days before my trip, I heard about the passing of a high school friend. That alone was thought-provoking. But a couple days later, I had to go to New York. So while I was there, I heard about details about the funeral. And then immediately after, I went to an art installation about the life and death of a human neuron in the frontal lobe. It's really dorky. It's on the cutting edge of neuroscience and digital art. So it was like a bunch of projectors. So 3 walls and the floor were covered. It was just like Technicolor terror, I called it. It was kind of visceral, so you saw like mush that formed into a neuron, and then kind of watching life happen and hearing it in kind of sounds, and it was just kind of really visceral and weird, and it looped like from birth until death. And you saw it make connections and then separate and fire. It was just really intense. My observations kind of went like, I am the way I am because of the neurons that connected and fired like this, and just kind of, I'm just electrical goo. So the neuron, when it died, it snapped apart, and it was kind of ugh. It was ugh. And me and my friend that I went with watched it cycle a few times before we were like, okay, let's go to the gift shop now. I felt pumped at the end, like kind of weirdly reinvigorated while raw. It was like just kind of weird. So get a chance to visit it at Art Tech House. It's just kind of intense. And then later, I had the pleasure of walking the High Line. I didn't know that existed. It's a former railroad turned into a footpath leading into something called the Hudson Yards, which is like a millionaire's playground, basically. It's built above the city, kind of, over like where the trains sleep. I don't know what that's called, like just a bunch of train storage. So we walked it and kind of talked about the art thing and whoever came to mind. And we sat down me and my friend sat down at the end of the High Line, and you could see just huge buildings, skyscrapers, apartments. And I saw a little sliver of something called the Vessel, and I heard about this building before I went. And it was intended as another art structure, kind of the heart of Hudson Yards. So it's just, and it looks like a beehive kind of just ascending staircases. And upon opening, it was met with a lot of controversy because it had only kind of a short railing. Its reputation forced it to close. And it was kind of eerie to see just like a little bit of the vessel. And again, me and my friend talked about it. And on Halloween, I headed to a cemetery outside of New York City where a man named Peter Steele, the front man of a band called Typo Negative, lays at rest. Me and my friend bonded over him, and we thought, why not? The pilgrimage was really majestic. If you don't really care about New York City, go to suburban New York City. New York, it's just really pretty, and maybe I just like fall. But it felt like you were being swallowed by trees. It was fantastic. I'm still really glad that I am in Wisconsin again because of the roads. It was kind of intense. We found his headstone mid-afternoon. Local fans had beat us there with Halloween decorations around the plots. It was really nice to see. There was a little trinket basket. Someone left a black cigarette, and I had a green lighter on me, and I thought, that's perfect. I remember whooping for joy, but I got a little choked up in the silence that followed. Like, I felt that quite a bit on the trip of just like, I'm not quite sure why, but I want to cry, but I'm not going to because I don't want to ruin the moment. But it wasn't like in a bad way. It was just so overwhelming. And like, I think I'm kind of lucid to the death that's entrenched in this season. And it wasn't planned in any way, but I don't know, it was Halloween and we were visiting a grave. Isn't that kind of goth? But it was like really thought-provoking, even though I was crazy busy. I came away with it hoping to make my life a little sweeter. And I hope that my frontal lobe will be done cooking soon, just a little bit. I did have a really great time. I think its recentness has kind of prevented me from seeing how it'll affect my beliefs. But I'm just really looking forward to winter and seeing what that brings. So while I am stagnant in my growth, I'm still experiencing going upward and outward. So it's not unenjoyable. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Frank Fucile. I'll be joining the congregation in I think 2 weeks, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm looking forward to that. And I thank you for making me feel welcomed here. I had to think pretty hard about this, and I feel a little, I don't know, it's weird. It's weird to try and get out your thoughts on, the way that you see the world and the problems in front of us. And I'm merely a 39-year-old unemployed or underemployed professor, so I guess if I bore you, I'm sorry. But I'm thinking here about, put as simply as possible, replicators and systems. And I guess I'll try and start with a few cheesy questions to key me in. Why are we here? Long ago in the primordial sea that once covered this entire planet, something copied itself. It presumably looked a lot like a strand of DNA. Now, that's not to say that it figured out how to copy itself, but of all the combinations of proteins and molecules in that soup, this one happened to replicate. And that's the source of all life on our planet, right there. Everything from single-celled bacteria to plants to animals to fungi. That's the first appearance of something that can replicate without even having its own body yet. That is a virus, right? And so this is not to say that replication is our essence. It's only one of many things we can do, but it does create the conditions that we have to deal with. Why is there life? Well, there was more of it, and then it made more of the more, right? And so in the soup of the world, everything is a potential component coming into relations with other components in populations. We're all assemblages of cells, just as those cells are assemblages of organelles. Once tiny parasites on the prokaryotic organisms were incorporated into those eukaryotic assemblages we call cells, right? The mitochondria captured, the nucleus captured within the organism. Once separate organisms working together and then became one thing. So whether at the microscopic or the planetary level, right, replication shapes the conditions of life, conditions that require all components to seek new relations as necessary and as appropriate to form survivable and productive assemblages. What happens when we die? Well, hopefully the matter of which we're made, generated long ago in the nuclear fusion ovens of ancient supermassive stars. You've heard this one before, right? Hopefully we'll return to the earth on which that matter once settled in the solar wind of space long ago, so it can be reincorporated into other assemblages of this earth. And what is inside of us? Well, there's no singular essence that glows deep inside us as a single flame. No, we are what we do. We are what we become. We are who we work with. The whole world is on fire, a flame all around. I am just as much my boots on the pedals of my bike or the bacteria in my stomach as I am the replication of my forebears mapping cells of my human body. Because there's so much else in it. Not only is the world alive all around us, it is alive within us. We're each like the Oogie Boogie Man. Right? Well, we are sacks of self stuffed with a writhing mass of vibrant matter, and I must learn to operate that assemblage that is myself within the various apparatuses of the world, to build something beyond myself, or to build myself beyond something. And so this is using some language of what we, academics these days are calling new materialism. The old materialism is pretty good too. And at the turn of the century, we have, for instance, Kropotkin challenging the prevailing misinterpretations of Charles Darwin's work and pushing back against those more vicious notions of survival of the fittest. Kropotkin comes up with the idea of mutual aid. You've probably heard this one too. Species certainly hunt and compete with each other, but most animals cooperate within their own communities to survive. Humans, well, we've survived because we do this particularly well and in very sophisticated ways. One might say the question of human happiness and progress is the question of which relations, which assemblages, which ecologies are formed by the populations of any society. How do we choose to relate to each other, and what kinds of relations do we encourage? So we ask ourselves, okay, how did the world get to be this way? Well, replication led to the rise of biological systems, the colonization of land and air, the transformation of global ecologies, climate, chemistry, eventually the rise not only of the human species, but of vast and dangerous assemblages, armies, corporations, states. The economic system that emerged in the early modern period, at first merely incentivized acquiring and hoarding wealth, but eventually the system would be defined by, are we following here? Replication, right? The ability to replicate itself. It even names itself after the strategy of using capital to make more money, right? Replication. And where does evil come from? Well, replication will eventually dominate any system, the basic law of geometric growth, right? Malthus used this to warn us of periodic catastrophe. Marx used this to predict systemic collapse. Any economy where owners and workers are as far apart as they are in industrial capitalism will replicate inequality and intensify injustices. In any system that incentivizes the accumulation of resources and the use or reinvestment of those resources to generate profit will, of course, lead to those exact inequalities and injustices. Those replicators take over, they keep replicating. And we merely have to ask ourselves, okay, which population matters to us more? The mass of human people or a pile of money, right? Beyond human suffering, our system profits on the suffering of animals. Ultimately, it's based on environmental destruction. We have mass replicated machines and chemicals that are changing the global climate, destroying local ecologies. How we survive as organisms within the assemblages of this earth is a matter of how we develop these local ecologies, how we reconstitute them in case of collapse. And so we must ask, what is to be done? And I've in the past used fancy political terminology for this, I'm still, I guess, a bit of a Marxist anarchist at heart. And I've said that about myself since I was maybe 17, and my ethical, my historical, my political outlook hasn't changed hugely, but my perspective is a lot more nuanced, a lot more developed. And more or less what it comes down to in the language that a Unitarian would understand is that community is the basis of everything, right? At the level of the cell, the organism, the parish, the city, the state. And when we see a community as a set of relations, they're always evolving, they're never static, nobody has a thing that they have to do, nobody has a thing that they must do at their essence. We understand our lives as reaching between each other, reaching within ourselves, beyond human boundaries, to find an adequate means of survival, of justice, and we hope equality one day. So I can leave it at that. I felt like a poem that I had said some of this a little bit better, but I think I went longer than I expected, so I'll leave it here for now. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me a space where I felt safe to speak these truths.
Good morning. My name is Shyre Mann. I was already feeling a little fragile and tender and vulnerable this morning as I was furiously writing notes on what I was going to say in the car in the parking lot, and then was moved to tears by Lacey's beautiful singing to start us off, then brought to laughter by our Greggmoorian chanters, and then just touched by our community's willingness and ability to help one of our own, even in the midst of a service that was going on. So not only am I nervous, but now I'm also a little in my feels, I guess, this morning. So I do believe that I will get emotional at some point, but Allison reminded me that you are a gentle audience. So I live on a corner double lot, not far from here, that includes many, many types and forms of plants, some more pleasant than others. When my husband and I moved into the home almost 20 years ago, the yard was a mess, but it has a lovely wraparound porch with gorgeous gingerbread detailing and a lovely little wrought iron fence that were huge selling points for me in wanting to get this home. In retrospect, agreeing that I would take responsibility for the painting of both of those things may have been a mistake. After completing some major work both on the porch and on the retaining wall to bring it up to code, we were ready to focus a little bit on the living and growing parts of our yard. We were clueless. Luckily, my father-in-law is a master gardener, so we convinced him to come for a visit. We worked together to choose the right plants for our yard. I wanted things that could grow in spite of me. And figure out where they would grow best and where they would look okay too. Knowledge, care, and attention went into the choice of each seed that we planted and each plant that we picked. The reality is our home was built many, many years ago, and some of the vegetation has deep roots, regardless of how much we want that vegetation to be there. Some things were planted lovingly and with true intention. Some plants have survived many, many attempts at removal. Some are admired with pride. Some are ignored with purpose. I'm not a regular tender of the flora in my yard, and I get both excited and annoyed at what shows up there each year. Depending on my mood, what was seen as an annoying weed one year is really not so bad in another year. Landscaping is sort of an afterthought. We don't water our lawn. We have eliminated a fence and erected a patio. We've removed an old dying crabapple tree and replaced it with a new crabapple tree. My husband gets big points for this because he bought us a wedding tree, which was a grafted with 2 different varieties that has thrived despite our lack of care of it. So we have added pathways and peonies from the UU plant swap. We've added dogs and a daughter to the landscape as well. Over the years, it's brought me great joy to stick my face into a clump of newly blossomed lilacs, to try and guess when the first daylilies will burst open, and to watch the bees busily gathering pollen on our gumball spirea. Shortly after the tragic murder of George Floyd, I was out weeding in my yard. I was heartbroken and mentally drained, only 2-ish months into the pandemic that we have been living in. I set a goal for myself of ridding the climbing vines in one very small portion of what I call my jungle. It's a huge patch of pampas grass, and there are some lovely hydrangeas that are buried in it, but they're basically suffocated. So I really needed to feel productive. I needed to get outside. I needed to get my hands in the dirt. My head was swimming. World and local events were taking a toll on my mental health, and I needed to do something. I consider myself to be a tolerant, non-judgmental advocate for the undervoiced, but how active was I actually being along those lines? How was I pushing myself to know and do more? Reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a movie was not enough, wasn't pushing me out of my comfort zone enough. I was also feeling a little grumpy about having to do this seemingly hard task at all. However, as the buzz of the bees, the chirps of the birds, and the warmth of the sun surrounded me, my brain was able to settle a little bit. The work that I was doing with my hands allowed me to follow a particular tangent that my brain was taking me on, weeding as a metaphor for hard things in life. I could put blinders on to all of the other factors and make sure a very tiny portion of my yard was 100% weed-free, ignoring the dandelion seeds just next door that were blowing in from the wind. With those blinders, I may be able to say, there, it's done, but it never really is. I could use all kinds of harsh chemicals and have weed-free, lush green turf, but nothing else could live there, and I would not feel comfortable about my dog zooming around while my daughter was choreographing yet another gymnastics routine in the grass. I could pick one type of weed and just continuously work to remove that from my yard, but then I have this vision of like a cartoon overtaking of all the other types of weeds. I would be a much better gardener if I actually took the time to do it in small, manageable chunks. Instead, I kind of vacillate between doing nothing and weeding furiously for hours and hours and then not being able to move for days afterwards. Weeding could also be a full-time endeavor in my yard, or a task so daunting that I give up before I even start. Becoming more anti-racist, setting healthy boundaries, changing any kind of a bad habit, or really any hard work can feel the same way. But it's important for me to adjust my perspective and keep seeing the big picture. Pull those weeds. One big thistle, a string of creeping Charlie. Speak up when someone uses inappropriate language. Own up to your own mistakes and missteps. There's no one right way to do the work, but just like the weeds, the work is never ending. I believe that there is good in this world. This congregation is a true reflection of that for me. We can pay attention to it, reframe our expectations of it, and create that good every single day. Plant a sunflower seed, compliment a stranger, trust that others are doing the very best that they can in any given moment. The right work is always worth doing, no matter how hard it may be.